Let's just sink into the room. Let your eyes take in the imagery that is right in front and around you, including your peripheral vision. Just take it all in at once and just rest in this space. Oh, let's see. Is everyone else unable to hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, okay. So maybe. Ooh, where'd that go? I think, Bob, maybe try turning your sound up and see if that helps. All right. So you know the drill. Sink into the room. Use your senses to anchor yourself in this moment. Step out of the past and future. Step into this physical body. Take the room in with your eyes. Take the room in with your ears. Sometimes at first that's a little disorienting, but as you're taking all of that in, just become gently aware of the center of all of it. Not through any kind of hard focus, but your physical body is the center. And just breathe from that space. A bunch of people just came in. If anyone has anything in particular they'd like addressed tonight, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll work it in. But other than that, just arrive at this moment. It's a feeling of stopping. Even though the moment has a sensation of movement in it, the experience of arriving there feels like stopping. Because it's a moment where you stop pushing and pulling at everything. It's a moment of giving up, not in despair, maybe in futility, but just letting go of the reins. One of the greatest paradoxes of life is that in that letting go of the reins, you finally have some control. And the reason that that is because the part of you that is letting go of the reins isn't the real you. This neurotic personality that we've all developed, that we all use to get through our day. That's what's letting go. And the part of you that's left, well, it's always had the reins in its hands. You've just been pushing and pulling at it so much. There's an image coming to my mind of when I was 16 years old, and my best friend, who's actually still one of my meditation students, just had a tremendous amount of hair, and she would sit in the passenger seat next to me and turn on this music and just start kind of dancing around, and her hair would just fly everywhere, and it was chaos, and it made it very, very hard to drive my car anywhere I was trying to go. That's kind of how the personality treats the real self. You come here with these inclinations, most of which people didn't hand you. You know, some of the aberrations of those inclinations maybe were handed to you, but you know, the parts of you that resist them maybe were handed to you. But there's a fundamental nature to each and every one of you. Above and beyond our sameness, a general flavor of experience that you're here to have. Some things that need to play out. And while that real part of you is trying to drive, you're pushing and pulling and shaking and dancing, and your hair is getting in the way. It's funny, this practice of meditation, as sophisticated as we can make it sound, it's really not too different than just when you kind of try and catch a baby's attention with a toy to get them to let go of the thing you don't want them to play with anymore. We give you something else to look at. Ah, speak of the devil. Here she is. Chelsea, I was telling a story about you, and how when I used to try and drive when I was 16, and you would turn up music and start dancing, and your hair would be like all over the place and getting in my face. And we were talking about how that's basically the role the personality plays on the true self as they're trying to actually take you where you're meant to go.
Oh, interesting.
That's what happens when you're late. The part of you that lets go of the reins is that personality part. And what's left is not annihilation. It's actually you, the core essence of those inclinations, all those things that make you you. What's gone is all the stories of lack, all the storylines of unfulfillment. And so you get to actually be your completed self. The cool thing about that is that, your life is just sort of like a mirror reflecting who you are back to you. We see it in how people respond to us. We see it in everything we do. The more combative parts of my nature get reflected back to me with usually unruly physicians who are giving me a hard time about a guideline or something I'm working on. Your peace gets reflected back to you as well. But the more time you spend as your true self, the more the world around you actually changes to become the instrument to get you where you're trying to go. Now, when I say that, I want to slap one thing out of your hands. When I say trying to get you where you are meant to go, I don't really mean that as a destination. I don't mean that as an attainment. Where you're meant to go is a place in consciousness mostly. But the world around you starts to shape itself in a way that makes that possible. You find yourself able to fulfill some of the things that you were here to fulfill, which often separates itself linearly in a series of life events. But all of that just starts to move more smoothly. And a lot of it is suffering because you learn from suffering and you're here to learn. It doesn't always look like, like when people talk about The Secret and things like that. You're not here to wish upon a star and have everything drop into your lap. There'd be no point to an incarnation where that happens like that. And that doesn't mean that you don't have any say in what happens to you, and it doesn't mean that you can't manifest things in your life. But at some point in your evolution, you stop insisting on certain things because you come to see the value in what life has in store. We've talked about that a bit. But with that said, that time you spent as your true self leads to a reflection in the mirror of life, such that that true self can have its proper influence in the world, that true self can have its proper expression in the world. So it's a deeper form of manifestation than just visualizing yourself making a lot of money. Those kinds of accomplishments are fine, but they're not the point. And if you don't believe me, go accomplish one of them. Those of you who have did it change anything? Or were you basically the same person, only now you had this extra thing? You know? It's okay, but it doesn't fix the problem. The problem is that you have this kind of false self made up mostly of a bunch of fears and desires that you have mistakenly identified yourself with, that is pushing and pulling while you're trying to do what you're here to do. So we take our attention off of it so that we can start to have an experience of what we actually are. And once we're able to consistently step into that, even if just for moments at a time, we start threading it into our daily life. The way that we do that is actually through remembrance. As you're walking through your day, you actually have to remember that everything you try and do in this class is always here now. There are different ways that that's practiced. You know, in some of the Hindu faiths, they actually do use the word remembrance, at least when it's translated into English. And they will do it by taking maybe a name of one of their deities and saying it over and over again in their head as they go throughout their day. You know, just to hijack the mind from the personality. For a long time, for me, the mantra was, it's happening now. This is it. It's happening now. My spiritual life is happening right now. Whatever I was doing, as busy as I was. For a while, I set a timer to go off every 5 minutes so that I would just come back, come back, come back. Other people do it by asking for guidance. You know, you're going through your day and you just make a request. Please help me wake up to my spiritual life in this moment. Please let me wake up from the dream of the personality. Show me how. And then you go about your day, but with one eye open, just looking for the teaching that threads you back into your true self. How does that work? Well, the world around you is reflecting you back to yourself. So if you're caught in a story of life, then the world's going to reflect that back. That's why every day feels kind of the same, because you're just stuck in the same stories. But in those moments, you pierce kind of a hole in that story. You make a request, and you make it with some feeling. Not a bunch of emotion, just intent. And that has its own reflection on the screen of life. And so you catch little things that help you stay awake. The same as if you're using a mantra in your head. And sometimes the shift is really subtle. But consistent, subtle shifts over a period of even a short amount of time lead to massive changes, massive lessons, massive rearrangements of consciousness. So never turn your nose up at a small spiritual moment. They all matter. Anytime you have ever come to this class and made an effort, even in moments when you weren't able to get anywhere, all of that is a thread in this large tapestry of your life experience. And it all has its own weight on the scales. If you do that enough in your life, you will stumble into these moments of radical shift. It's not about the radical shifts. If you reach for radical shift, it won't happen. But if you're just consistent, humbly consistent, you will shift into moments where you suddenly go from something that you are taking so seriously, something that is causing you a lot of suffering, inspiring you to make other people suffer, and you'll just wake up in the middle of it. You'll see the truth of it. You'll understand the people around you in a moment. And it'll change your behavior. And it'll change your relationships. People will learn from being around you. And if you keep going, there are even bigger moments, moments that are hard to even talk about. But you'll go through windows of time where you have a deep, deep, deep understanding of what this life is. Deep in ways that you really couldn't break it down for somebody, except to say that it's an experience of something that's actually kind of perfect, organized, directed, that even the darkest parts of it are beautiful. And that's nothing to take my word for. It's just a reason to thread your practice into your life through those subtle shifts. We're not the mess we created. That mess is just a weird garment that we're wearing, and you can take it off whenever you want. Doesn't mean you don't have to deal with the cycles that it set in motion. But in those moments, in this class alone, where all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what's happening in your life, you're comfortable. Those are moments where you just took off that garment. Why not thread that through your whole life? Are there any questions about that before we just step into practice? Any but what about this, but what about that?
Well, you were talking before about how the point is not necessarily like expands you or whatever. If you're suffering and you have a way of what is happening, does that actually
Well, there's a big difference between suffering because you believe the story that you've created for yourself versus suffering because you are sharing a world with people who are suffering versus suffering because you have like physical pain in your body, or something like that. Those are three very different situations. But to navigate this world, to make anything happen, it's always going to involve friction. Friction is just part of the way life comes into being. It's the way status quos change. And so you can get to a point where you maybe don't interpret that as suffering. There are certainly people who decide to just step out of life entirely and just slip into a nirvana state. But I don't really believe that's the point of life. You know, we should be able to stand square shouldered with what's on our plate and go ahead and let it hurt where it needs to hurt. Enjoy the freedom where the freedom is there. But the true freedom is in recognizing that none of that is absolute reality. It's just part of the ups and downs of everything. If you have to escape it, you're not really free of it. I think even the Buddha figured that out, right? He had his Hinayana Buddhism, which was escapist, it was nirvana. But by the end of his time, he switched to Mahayana Buddhism, which was the path of the Bodhisattva, where you literally stay behind and help people deal with their suffering. And your protection actually becomes this unabashed generosity that flows through you. But yeah, but the mechanisms of life are what they are for a reason. And if you live long enough, I don't think anybody my age even could deny that the suffering that they've experienced has led to more growth than the decade they spent on a monastery. There's something that you just can't simulate with a teacher. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a teacher. Definitely go through, have that experience, come face to face with your mind if that's your path. But just know that at some point, no teacher is going to be able to do what life does, which is find the specific lock and key way to make you specifically miserable. It's going to find that way to actually just reflect back to you everything you're trying to avoid until you can learn to just stand open in the face of it. And there are so many layers to that even after you've had a fundamental awakening, you continue to peel layer after layer after layer. just so that you can stay awake. And there's just, I mean, it's an amazing road. It's an incredible amount of learning, and it's a deep amount of learning. And you're talking to somebody who, has spent a tremendous amount of time learning in academic ways, teaching in academic ways. But the value of that academic learning was not the systems that I learned or any of just sort of the intelligent facts that I took in. It was the struggle. It was getting pushed against a wall and not being able to see a way forward and finding a way to keep going in the face of that. That's what life gives you. And so, I don't know, I've come to lower my opinion a little bit of some of the paths that just try and remove that experience for people. Yes, you could achieve happiness faster if you lifted all those burdens off of somebody, or put them in a life where those burdens didn't exist in any really meaningful way. But you also see those teachers that have their awakening in the middle of the woods, on the top of a mountain. And those are the teachers that then, when they come back to start taking on students, end up having to work out all their karma through their students. Those are the ones that end up with weird money issues, gender issues, sexual issues. It's not that they didn't wake up, it's that they did it without really having to deal with the major challenges of life first. Those teachers, if they're not careful, can really damage someone's spiritual life. Not everybody gets out unscathed. There's value to all the things you hate about your life. That's kind of the hard truth. And that doesn't mean you should make yourself a doormat, and it doesn't mean that you should seek pain. I don't think you should seek it, and I don't think you should push it away. Just show up. This moment right here, this time in your life, has the perfect sequence of challenges to take you to your next level spiritually, to wake you up to what you are. On the other side of all of those challenges is your personal power. The part of you that just got separated from you and behind the wall of this essentially like and dislike system. And to get it back, all you have to do is let go of that dictate of, I'm this way but not that way. I like this, I hate that. I mean, it's okay to not like things, but if you can just stay open in the face of it and be willing to interact with it without fear, all that power and all of its lessons come spilling back to you. I was somebody who always actually, some of the people aren't going to believe this when I say it out loud, but had a hard time with conflict. When I was much younger, I was that person that would just sit in the corner of a room at a party and not speak to anybody. A lot of the roles that I've had to take in the last 5 years have been very visible roles in my career, very public, visible roles. And there are people with all sorts of good intentions and bad intentions that want to publicly take you down. And I've had to just sort of stand in the face of that and respond to it, you know? And I don't know, it's like in one way, there's nothing spiritual about the experience. And in another way, I've grown more spiritually from that than a decade on a monastery. Because it's strengthened that part of you. All those challenges, they either weaken you and make you put your head in the sand, which just means you're not ready for them yet and you have to work on something smaller, or you rise to that occasion and everything that you were missing that was stuck on the other side of that comes back to you. Because this wasn't the first time I had those challenges. They come back over and over in different names and faces. You know, the kids I dealt with in high school. You know, it's not different. It's just that I didn't deal with it back then. And so all of that kind of freedom of movement and steam to experience your life gets stuck on the other side of that wall, of that thing you're not willing to stand up to. And it's okay. Life will reflect it back to you over and over and over again until you do it. That's the mechanism of life. That's why we're here. And that's why I say, it's kind of perfect. And I don't think anybody can simulate it the way it actually is. Nor is it necessary to do so. Show up for what's in front of you. Let it hurt. Be scared. Step into the waters slowly or quickly, but step in. Stay there until your body stops shivering. You know, it's like that experience of getting into a cold lake, right? At first, it's an unpleasant experience. But if you work your way in, you get to a point where your temperature equalizes, and now you've got this whole place you can go, right? You've got a whole lake you can swim in. Life's the same. All right. So let's just step into meditation now, unless anyone has another question. Place your attention, the forehead and crown, just to kind of center yourself. Let your eyes take in the entire room at once. Begin to watch your breath. And as you're breathing in and breathing out, let your guards down. This is a safe moment. There's nothing you have to protect yourself from in this moment. So as you breathe, let the breath move freely. Let there be nothing inside of you that light can't touch. Nothing to protect, nothing to defend, nothing to hide. Let it all be exactly what it is. Inside of you, but extend that same courtesy to the room around you. Nothing to hold in place. Leave it all wide open. Relinquish your knowledge. All that stored data about everything's limitations. Just release your investment in it. Everything you think you know about me, let it go. As I let go of everything I think I know about you, so that you can be what you actually are. Without my opinions shaping you. Let's give each other that freedom. It is a spiritual warrior's highest courtesy to relinquish their knowledge. It doesn't go anywhere. You're just no longer limited to it. It's all still in there. You just don't use it to hold someone in place anymore, or yourself. That's good. Watch for the next layer. You'll feel it like a little contraction. And just let it open up. Just like a closed fist opening its hand. One of my spiritual teachers used to say there's no such thing as standing still. You're always either evolving or de-evolving. You're always either expanding or contracting. And both phases are fine. Unless that contraction is a program in your head running amok. Instead of a moment of rest or introspection. Or a moment of manifestation. You maintain your own reach. Can you ask it of yourself? A little shift in the attention. A little request. That life then responds to. Help me let go. And then life responds. Help me expand. Help me see beyond the story. The story that's trying to reassert its dominance. Without squashing it, help me see beyond it. Giving it full space to be whatever it needs to be. Help me also see beyond it. Nothing to resist. I had a mentor once who said, "There's no point in arguing with stupid." There's no point in fighting this neurotic personality. Let it be what it is. But expand beyond it. Okay, everybody. This week, I want you to notice how life is reflecting your expectations back to you. And I want you, just through a simple request, with intent, to alter that reflection just slightly. It can be a simple request. Show me my spiritual life in this moment. Show me the spiritual teaching of this moment. Something like that. You know, or if you're religious, you can basically reach out directly to your deity. Show me your hand in this moment. Something like that. And then there's nothing to conjure. Just allow it to make the little shift that it makes. And pay attention. And do that several times. And if you notice it, you'd be smart to journal about it. Because those realizations, they slip away. Most of the useful stuff doesn't hang around, so it's always a good idea to write it down. But I know from decades of teaching that that's probably not going to happen. Any questions before we end? Okay, everybody. I will be here next Thursday, and I wish you all a good week. Thanks for coming.